Welcome to Unboxing, Play and Profit for the Gaming Curious. I'm Lane Nooney.
En I'm Joost van Dreunen.
And we're here digging deep on why games matter in today's economy. On the docket today, Friday, July 4th, we're starting with a deep dive into the latest Xbox layoffs, how Microsoft keeps trimming teams even after record spending, and what this wave means for the future of first-party development. Then a look at the ESA's 2025 Essential Facts Report, what the industry's data says about who's playing games in America, and what it carefully leaves out. Plus, Lane's fresh dispatch from this year's Games for Change Festival. All that and more with your two very civic co-hosts. But first, we've got some catching up to do. Yost.
What's up?
I wish you guys could see the size of this man's jaw. He shaved his beard. I was like, who just got on this call? I don't recognize him.
It's not a Snapchat filter, although I have those installed. It's real. It was time. I came down the mountain. I was too scraggly, and then one setting led to another until finally I just committed to the razor. It feels good. I'm aerodynamic.
Yeah.
I get to work earlier now, like 12% faster in traffic. But what really motivates it is sort of, I guess, two things. But one of them is I must groom, so eventually, like, what else can I do? But I'm surrounded where I live by people that have like changing hairstyles, and by which I particularly mean women of color. They have such a broad variety of just like different braids and like decorate, and you just like, all I have is this one option.
Is this the lower half of my face?
It's yeah. I got nothing else to go on, so I manscaped the shit out of it.
I mean, braids could be a fun, for the front. Just get one of those like Nordic
yeah.
twisties.
I could do that.
I feel like there's a like Red Dead Redemption 2 facial hair mod for you out there somewhere.
You get some of the handlebars. It's just there's too many Brooklyn dads with facial hair. It's all beards. It's like, so I'll grow it back to just. I don't want to upset the balance in the forest.
Most of them look younger, but you look fresh faced. It's like they put you in that baby meme generator.
I'm actually 23, Lane. This whole time, I've been just
doing a phenomenal impersonation of a Gen Xer.
There you go. So that's my day. What did you do? Did you go anywhere? What's happening?
At the end of last week, I was at Games for Change. Mm-hmm. It was also Pride weekend, but obviously Games for Change is more important. Homophobic, really, to put Games for Change on Pride weekend. So that took place down at Parsons. It was a real nice, pleasant walk from the Washington Square campus of NYU up to Parsons, where I think historically that's where Games for Change got its start, and now has, I think, for a while was away for what I'm sure is a long story that I don't want to hear about, and now is back. And I hadn't been to that event since 2013 or 14, I think, was the last time I was at a Games for Change. So it was interesting to kind of re-encounter that vibe with a lot more just kind of knowledge and industry awareness under my hat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. How was the vibe for you? Like, from the pictures I saw, it seemed like it was a much bigger production than I remember it to be. It used to be a little bit more like an expansive sort of academic conference.
Yeah, I think you went in like the really early years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is now a pretty slickly funded endeavor. The ESA is one of the sponsors, Zola. It was really funny talking to a bunch of game educators and indie game devs. They were like, who is Zola? And I was like, oh, that's hilarious, right? Like Zola does payment processing, right? They sponsor crap tons of stuff at GDC, but it's not a company that a lot of traditional, or a lot of, like, I would say indie or educational teachers and devs have to interact with very much. Mm-hmm. This is, I mean, what I had a lot of stressed out thoughts about Games for Change. There's kind of,
You
and
had a lot of stressed out thoughts.
there's kind of like two billings, there's like main stage billing, which was kind of weird. It feels very tailored and manicured for investors and PR marketing reps. There was a talk by the VP of global for Xbox. I'm blanking on his name, about like how making games is about love, and I was like, that's a wild
Oh,
statement.
Leo Lieb. Yes.
Yes, there we go. Like it was like, I'm gonna tell you a history of the definition of the word love using like 6 classical philosophers, and I was like, what's happening right now? Also ironic, given Microsoft doesn't love its employees, I guess, but we'll get to that. And then that was followed up by a lot of fireside chats happening. One of them with Deepak Chopra about mindfulness in games and how we're going to use AI to put mindfulness on into Web3. Like it was just, I was like, what kind of weird
Mm-hmm.
snake oil is happening right now? And then that was very incongruously followed by a panel called "How Gen AI is Changing the Game Industry," and it was like, I think a turnoff for like. First of all, the auditorium almost cleared out when he went up to speak.
But Deepak.
No, everyone
Oh, the
everyone
Gen
was
AI
there for
person.
Deepak when the Gen AI guy came. And then he kind of just like skipped the question of like, what is this doing to labor? And he's like, here's all these cool things it's doing for that player interactions that we can have now. It had really nothing to do with games for change, quote unquote. It felt like a kind of like an industry update. I definitely heard a lot of people muttering as they walked off about how horrifying they thought that talk was. But there's this kind of like big budget veneer going on in the main stage that's, high capitalism, but no one's going to call it that, right? I mean, you could say that Games for Change, the other title is games about mitigating the violence of capitalism, but no one can call it capitalism. Like that's sort of the experience. Deepak Chopra talking about how we're all going to have like online therapists, and it's like, can we even acknowledge or even bring into the room the root causes of why we think these things are like necessary or quote unquote innovations? Like, can we talk about the unraveling of the fucking social safety net? Like it was just weirdly disconnected from a lot of the hype. Was just kind of, it was like odd to listen to and be like, wait, change what? Like, what are we trying to change? Like, what is the propositional future?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, it has maybe like generic themes, like equality and people feeling good, and but it was like, what is, yeah, the we can't do anything too provocative because we don't want to scare off the investors who are here. And many of the people who are at this conference are, it's a weird mix of folks looking for investors in their projects, people from NGOs, there's people from the UN there. I've heard that usually there's like one or two folks from like DARPA military stuff hanging out at Games for Change. And then you go into the actual like kind of smaller scale talks, and I heard a really cool panel about these folks who make kind of immersive experiences to help refugees in like Minnesota learn how to use the bus. Stuff that's like super specific, highly tailored, really thoughtful, not about having market value, or like immersive experiences allowing folks who were displaced during the drawing the line between Pakistan and India being able to visit, allow elders to visit their home towns that they
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen in 75 years, right? Stuff that was felt very powerful. And so maybe the asset is that this is a conference where that kind of stuff can actually get airtime, and at many conferences it would not be able to. But it kind of happens under the radar of this larger, more perplexing thing going on. I don't know. That was a long speech, but
No, I mean, look, I was planning to go. I couldn't make it in the end, but it's the sort of prominence of the conference and the long-standing nature of it. Those are pretty convincing to me. I was curious to go this year just to see exactly where it's ended up after all this time. Right? It's like, are we still asking critical questions, or is it a conduit of somebody's agenda in some ways? And what you're kind of telling me here is that it seems a little undefined, right? It's a bit of a
or I think that there's like interesting work that is allowed to exist as long as these kind of like very generic talking points get hit
Hmm.
on the
Hmm.
main stage. Like, is everyone there asking the same question? Absolutely not. I also don't think a conference like this is necessary. That's what it's trying to do, right? It's a charismatic concept under which like many different constituents and umbrellas are hanging. Um, yeah, and also people who I think would not maybe otherwise identify themselves as doing games will show up because it's kind of the most professional route into games if you're coming from another industry.
Right. So, did you? Would you say go again next year? Like, what's your final verdict here,
I
Zach?
mean, I didn't have to pay for that ticket. I'd go again next year. Like, I would, yeah, in the sense that I attend these things to be sort of like an anthropologist of like what's cooking, who's here, why, what are the different kind of political economy interests happening inside this space. What is the thing that everyone feels like they need to get out of an experience like this? I like going for that reason. Do I feel like moved by games after? No.
Mhm.
Or like I'm not there for that particular kind of Kool-Aid. Let's say that.
Yeah, I mean, there's always seems to be some kind of like struggle between, on the one hand, finding sponsors for this kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? The universities around the world, they have enough big rooms, they'll provide you the facilities, but then you got to have like one, two, or a handful of big corporations that actually pay for the people that actually make it happen and the snacks and whoever you fly in to come do a talk. And there's a trade off in that because it's clearly not as grassroots anymore as it was. When I look at the programming for the 2 days, some of these people are pretty high level and they're real decision makers across the spectrum. I would have liked maybe to see like a more like a theme, like games
Hmm.
for change with regards to what? I mean, it's
That's
Pride
it. Yeah.
Month, right?
Yeah.
Like, what about that one? Can we talk about diversity or something? I don't know. Like, seems obvious to tie it to like an agenda of sorts, or to at least in parts or this year answer the question: change what? Games for change of what? The
Yeah.
games for
Yeah. So
change of.
like get the serious games for social change, and it's like social change is this kind of radioactive concept right now. And
Mm,
what I really did not feel, at least watching those first three opening talks, I was like, no one here wants to talk about social change. Like, not in an explicit way,
uh-huh.
right? It was 2 p.m. before I heard someone say the word Palestine. And I thought that was very interesting. And it was from a girl who like didn't give a fuck, or a woman who was there like debuting a game about border crossing.
Reporters without borders.
And
Yeah.
but like I literally attended a panel about like games for refugees, and like there was a weird kind of ominous silence around certain topics, things that are still okay to talk about. Climate change, that's a thing that we can say on the main stage and doesn't seem to freak anyone out, but everything else felt very danced around. And the analysis I got from some of my friends who one have gone to this event for a very very long time is that because of the investor and sponsor relationships, it turns down anyone, like it kind of, people get kind of muted politically. My sensibility was that anyone with an actually radical agenda left this space a long time ago. This is not a thing
Right.
that you like
But
attend or.
it's a forum. Like, you want to talk about a range of things, right? But I would probably say that it's this the role, the responsibility of the organizers and moderators to make sure that we have a good range. Like, either define it, we're only going to talk about climate or gender or whatever beforehand, so that when I walk in, that's what I'm getting. I'm here for the hot dogs and there's no burgers, whatever. And so if you leave that open, then it creates these negative spaces of like, okay, like people had a really hard time talking about XYZ. Like, why is that? And it can make it feel a little toothless, because I'm not saying that games are going to revolutionize the world, but it does propose a position as a consumer where you're more actively engaged. Like, it's literally asking you to make decisions to advance the narrative or to participate in these experiences. And so that, I think, is the easy way to explain the hook as to why games would have the potential for social change and so on. And then to leave that out of it, to
I mean, I don't. I think so.
It
We
seems like a
weren't there for
loss.
day two. I know. I did see a screenshot of Eric Zimmerman in front of a giant slide on the main stage that said, "Game design will not save the world."
Oh, thank God.
And I
Eric
and
is
I
great. I
and
love
I
Eric.
think that I was also, Frank Lance, and I think maybe I'm forgetting the name of the person he would do this with, but they used to do a kind of post mortem, I guess, on Games for Change that was part of the agenda that was making fun of Games for Change. That was sort of like, so now that we've all, now that we know that games are gonna, make democracy possible, like a little more, maybe like direct engagement with the fallacies of the inherent problem of the positioning of the event, right? And
Hmm.
that kind of stuff I think can be very reassuring when those kind of transparent conversations are happening. I was only there for the first day. They wanted to swing big. Six kinds of love, man. What kind of love do you want to
Look,
make games be about for you? You know, Game design is love.
oh my God. That's it's too much. You're coming on too strong for me. But I think that that's a really, like, this is what I've always liked about that conference, and then we can move on. But it's the fact that, like, because it tries to be more than just let's make a bunch of games and a bunch of money, because it dilutes the for profit motivation at least a little bit, and it isn't trying to
Yeah,
lecture you on like conversion rates and monthly active user
yeah,
metrics. It's one of the few spaces where it's like, all right, let's have this conversation. And for all intents and purposes, like, the games industry, if you compare it to music and film, has the highest percentage of women in decision making roles. It's like 20% compared to like 24 in film and 6 in music, you know?
whoa,
And so, and it's been increasing over the last 7 or 8 years from like 18%. So in that sense, the games industry as a industrial community or whatever, like a for-profit collective, does really well, comparatively, but it needs to have a form of sorts. Like, where, like, what's the that if games are supposed to like bleed into society and vice versa, then there has to be channels like this. And so I'm always curious because it's a thermometer more than
yeah.
anything else to see what's being discussed and like what's the vibe, who shows up for this, and where are we as an industry in that sense. So appreciate that. Was a great report. Thank you, reporter Lane.
I will always go and report on things I don't have to pay to attend. So, I mean, I'm not the market for this, right? I mean, there's a lot of people in there trying to use this as a place to network. It is an opportunity for networking within a specific space inside the game industry, and the utility of that can't be underestimated for the people who are going for that purpose.
Mhm. Yeah, I always enjoy this one. It's a good one. I hope they keep on organizing these. It's a really valuable one in my mind.
Doesn't seem like it's going anywhere.
Cool. Let's talk about things that are going somewhere.
Yeah, so literally as of today, when we're recording this on Wednesday, July 2nd, the news is breaking about a bunch of new, like 9,000 layoffs at Microsoft. This was just broken on Bloomberg. Was that was who dropped that?
A few at the same time. I saw it on The Verge, on Bloomberg. I saw it on GameFile, I believe.
Okay. Oh, it's Schreier. Okay. So Microsoft plans major job cuts at Xbox gaming division. Jason Schreier just filed this at Bloomberg as of this morning/afternoon, and it's been picked up and recirculating at all the other outlets. Yost, you got on this call and you were like, I want to talk about Xbox, and so we threw the whole plan for the day out the window.
Mm.
And so I want to hear, what do you got to say about Xbox? Just like a week after we do the story about the ZeniMax contract ratification, and now there's, yeah. Sorry, I'll shut up and let you
No,
let you go.
it's fascinating. So the reason it's interesting to me is because, like, they mentioned that they were already foreshadowing or forewarning everybody last week, saying layoffs are coming, right? Sort of like, brace yourself. And then this week it comes out that indeed, like, King Digital, their big mobile division that they acquired through Activision Blizzard, is losing 200 positions or so, which is roughly 10% of the King Digital division or the group. And then there's additional ones at ZeniMax. I reached out and they're like, yeah, look, we're doing this rolling. Like, they're not going to tell you how many are going to fall where. And first, they inform the personnel, so which I think is, of course, fine or fair. But relatively speaking, it creates this narrative like, oh my gosh, what's going on with Microsoft? And I really like that conversation because it showcases a lot of tension. On the one hand, sure, it's a lot. You have 9,000 people. That's a lot of people. That's by comparison as many as they laid off. What was it again? In 2023, they laid off like 10,000 employees because they were pushing for more efficiency. That was sort of the year when the industry turned and we went from growth to efficiency. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
AI
yeah.
was part of that. And so 10,000 people had to go across all of Microsoft. And then in 2014, they laid off 18,000 people after they acquired Nokia and tried to build out their own mobile division, if you recall
Oh
this.
yeah. Ooh.
So, so
I
this is
do
the
not
third,
recall, but yes.
well,
Okay.
this was a long time ago. This is 11 years ago. But the in this sort of historical overview of Microsoft, like this is the third largest layoffs at once in in the company's history. So that is something to note. The anxiety, I guess, that it triggers here is the fact that a lot of people say, "Oh, what's going on with the games division?" But it's only a few hundred people from games, and if you calculate that, if you take the total gaming headcount to be something like 20 or 21,000 people, it's only 2% of total. So it's not this dramatic 10% cut that everybody seems to think it is. So that's one thing, but it does kind
So first initially you're saying we're having a kind of overreaction to this news? Is
well,
that
I mean, so with 21,000 employees in all of Microsoft Gaming, I do think like 400 jobs, which of course it's very sad. At the same time, it's a small percentage. In fact, by comparison, others like Sony has been shutting down and laying people off. Some of them are friends of mine. So it's not unique to Microsoft or out of the range of things happening in the industry right now. And it's as far as gaming is concerned, like they could have said we're doing 10% across the industry and every division has to like let go of 10% of people. So it seems that if they're letting off, like say 2% in gaming, then the difference has to come from somewhere else. So there's probably a whole bunch of people working on Excel or like Azure that are getting laid off at vastly greater numbers than in gaming right now. So it's more relative within the company than overall, which is not an overreaction, but I do think that Microsoft has put itself into a position where they raise a lot of questions and they're not answering all of them very convincingly. And that's when the news of layoffs like this becomes a problem because now you have to also manage for that, right? If you had a clear thing that's going on, if you could show that there was all this success and prosperity coming from this, but they're not indicating it, they're not selling the story as well, right? So it feels like they are, as a games division, always a little bit beholden to Microsoft proper, and that makes it difficult for them to control the narrative, which
huh?
then becomes this sort of flashpoint of like, oh my god, gaming is dying, Microsoft sucks, which I think is a little, maybe that's a little too much. And the reason I say that is not because I'm pro Microsoft one way or the other so much. I did buy the new Oculus Xbox thing, by the way, but that's just because I like doing that. But it's not because I'm pro Microsoft so much as to say like I think it obfuscates some of the sort of more endemic issues that are going on in mobile
Hmm.
gaming. And so King Digital is the tip of the spear in mobile for Microsoft. They're doing the layoffs in their division, and if you look at mobile space, the mobile space in general, like that one is being going through a lot of transitions. And I think that that is a far more interesting topic. It's the saturation in mobile gaming. It's the zero sum dynamics of user acquisition using performance marketing and so on. So it's the business model there is under a lot of pressure, and that's what's changing. And they're going to cut out a bunch of managers, as they call it. But in the mobile space, you have a retraction. Like there's a declining growth. There's a client. Like efficacy is down. So in other words, like mobile isn't this amazing thing anymore that it used to be, and you see companies have to adjust to that. So that story doesn't get told at all, in the changing of the business model. It goes a little bit too much towards gaming is dying, Xbox is terrible, blah blah blah, which I think
Yeah.
is the wrong way to think of it. So while I have you on that, so the data that I dug up on this is interesting to me. So if you were to just in general terms look at the industry, right? So if you take the growth trend in headcount among the 15 largest companies from 2012 to 2018, so you take that 6 year period and you look at how many people they would have had in 2024, that number is 19% lower than what it is in actuality. And so there's still a gap in terms of
You
the
mean
number.
you mean that year over year growth was higher than what would have been than based on if you were basing year over year growth on that 6 year period.
Correct. Right. So it's
Okay.
a,
So actually the are you talking about the game industry or are you talking about like these companies, are you talking about their headcounts generally, right? Because Google is a game company now, and Microsoft and Apple, even though that is not even primarily what many of these companies do. So
yeah. So, well, so in my analysis, I excluded those platform companies because they're
okay,
not really game companies like Apple. And plus, it's totally hard to see. But if you just take publishers,
okay,
right? So, top publishers have been able to insulate themselves really well for most of the downturn so far. So that's sort of like the jab, if you will. They've been consolidating and aggregating and buying up IP and expanding and to basically insulate themselves from any kind of change. It's a lot about creating IP catalogs and libraries. What they end up doing then is pushing the downturn mostly to everybody else, right? And so you see outside the top 10, you see a lot of companies declined the last 2 years, like 13, 40% year over year declines, while the top 10 companies sustain growth. They are in 2023 grew 10% and in 2024, 4%. So they're still in the black. They're still showing positive growth, but that growth is declining. So that's catching up with them. In other words, the
okay.
strategy of consolidation no longer insulates them as well as they had it
Got
before.
it. So this kind of consolidating and centralizing impulse creates basically the sort of dynamics we're very accustomed to now, where it's, like, 80% of the fun is had by 20% of the holders or something like that, right? These very kind of zero, not that those are your statistics, but right, that we often see that in whether it's mobile gaming, Steam, right, that it's the highly consolidated companies that are taking the lion's share of the revenue, and everyone else is just sort of like battling it out for
Yes.
survival in the bottom, what you would say, 40, 50, 70,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, I mean the top 10 are in the Coliseum. The rest of ones of us are in the pits, just knuckle boxing each other to death, right? So if you say that in numbers, and if that's let's stay with pugilistic metaphors here, but so
Let's.
if what I previously described was the jab, like the punch really comes from the fact that the current layoffs, they're part of a broader correction. If you look at the top 50 non-platform gaming companies, so basically just publishers, and you exclude all the big Tencents and Sonys and so on, the total workforce has increased. Specifically, it reached 146,000 people in 2024, which is 19% bigger than if it was a linear growth for the period based on basically pre-pandemic growth. So
Okay.
we're still like 19%. We're looking at 90% of excess workforce for some of these companies, which is very alarming. Like so, if this is happening now, is like I feel like we're going to see more of this.
Like
And
alarming in the sense that they grew, I mean, that they grew too much too fast, and now
yes, they used cheap capital during the pandemic to
they
grow very quickly.
to consolidate. And I mean it's like, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but the way I think of this is like these are the conditions of ruination, just in a different sense, right? Like that they gobbled up lots of other companies, and now this kind of they inhaled, and now they have to spew, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yes, it's
yeah.
like the market can't sustain the size of their workforce, and they have to push for reductions, which is unfortunate. Some of that is to be expected, but what really is a shame about these things is the fact that suddenly now we're starting to see all the shutting down of certain projects, and that's always going to be part of the mix, of course. But it's always sad that like post acquisition, a lot of the more experimental stuff or things that haven't been published yet, or sort of like the undeveloped new IP that's sort of in the back of the office, in the back of the studio, that gets shelved or thrown in the freezer or just discontinued because we're going to focus only on the things that make money. And some of that is to be expected, but I think the market has come down on them so hard that even now, 24 months later, they're no longer insulated from the downturn, and we're going to continue to see these layoffs because they have to correct for it. Like, it's mobile gaming is tough. The overall industry is moving in a different direction. Circana, to round this out, offered up, or they did a study together with the Wall Street Journal. In that, they indicated that spending among 18 to 24-year-old video gamers is down 25% year over year in the US. And so if you take into account, like, you have declining consumer spend, you have rising costs, you have this like deprioritization, you have AI providing efficiencies, apparently, allegedly. And so we have to now fire against those numbers, basically. All of a sudden, it feels like the worst hasn't quite hit us yet. But I don't want to be an alarmist here.
Interesting.
It just seems like the numbers still leave a huge margin between what is and what probably should be. And that's kind of worrying.
Got it. When I teach this, it all kind of becomes a blur of how many people are getting laid off this semester, right? And so you see it as a series of headlines, right, which always look bad, right? Always. Like, it's never like company adds 3,000 new workers. Like, I've never seen that headline, right?
It's not a headline.
It's,
Yeah.
but so I think one of my maybe counterintuitive questions here is, okay, so there was increased growth in employment because of consolidation. But now those were all kind of overestimations. We talked about that when it was happening, right? That there was this kind of delusional, there was tons of expansion. And I guess even for the top, that has not insulated them. But is there a case to be made that the if there hadn't been all of this consolidation that winds up doing exactly what you describe, eventually kind of ending up in layoffs or the deconstruction or canceling of more experimental works, could we have had a healthier ecosystem if what these companies weren't doing was trying to use other companies as assets to produce kind of market protection?
Yeah, but see, like, that's not how the world works, right? Yes, but what manager is going to say, "Hey, I know that everybody else is hiring right now, and we're acquiring, with this credible pace, but we're not going to do any of that. We're going to just like steady the
But
ship."
that's not how the you know that's not how the mainstream economy works.
That is
That's
not how, like, and
yeah.
it's the same.
No,
And then and
I understand that, right? I think what I'm trying to point to here is like there are other ways our economies can operate or imagine themselves, and
Mhm.
this is what occurs when we see all of these things as forms of asset, like financialization, assetization. That's not a word. Asset, like the assetification of
You just want
companies.
to say ass on the podcast, like you
Yeah,
just said it three
in
times.
in the service of
Very
these
subtle.
kind of larger market goals, right? Where
Yes.
it's not really about what anyone's producing, or it's about how it looks good in a embracer market report, annual report, how different things seem like they can go alongside each
Yes.
other. um
Yeah, no,
but
look, like, expansion is always, part of the positive narrative for a company. That's how you say it. Like, our numbers are up. It's like, oh, okay. But what a lot of companies do is they acquire innovation, they acquire teams and talent. You see this in AI now. It's like it's all about acquiring talent through acquisitions. And so you get these wild valuations for young startups and young founders that just happen to be really smart because they just happen to study artificial intelligence at MIT, and then they started a company, and that company's now worth $14 billion
for
since two
no for
years
no
ago.
fucking for
Well,
in
I'm
no
sure that
way.
there's a reason, but it's like they will spend
Nah.
disproportionately for scarce resources to
Yeah.
just be the top dog. Like, the logic is never, let's make something sustainable, beautiful, and good that really
Yeah,
works.
the
With the
the
climate,
shorthand.
it's like we want to be big.
the shorthand I have for this is that all market behavior is an anxiety response, right? That this isn't about, is that like, take away this idea that these things are happening because we're like powerful, motivated, proactive thinkers, and it's like, actually you're all scared shitless. And like that's why this is the what this takes the shape that it does, right?
Yep. It's the while I think that that's perhaps a little too black and white. Like in general, that's correct, but it's always you know I want to be nice about this, but what people at large corporations tend to find, like, what tends to motivate them is they just don't want to lose their job,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's sort of part of the vernacular that also goes for all the sort of vendors that a large company attracts. It's not in McKinsey's interest to tell Microsoft, "Hey, we solved the problem, guys. See you later. Contract's over." It's like, no, they like, actually, it turns out you had a cold, but now also you have a tumor or whatever. Like, they always find the next
Yeah.
thing to solve, right? So that's just the nature of it, in that it always has to expand. Like, client accounts always have to grow.
Yeah.
You always have to increase your sales targets, whatever. So in that narrative, it's like, I just don't want to be the one who gets cut when the other shoe drops. So that's what
Yeah.
motivates these companies, as
So
opposed to how do we do this better with fewer people, kind of
yeah,
thing.
the sort of the social and maybe kind of externality cost of these kinds of decisions gets externalized kind of quite literally because of the way that the market is organized.
Right. And that's bringing it back to Microsoft with these layoffs today. Like, that's where I think that, yeah, sure, it's alarming that King Digital is doing layoffs, but in the Microsoft universe, it is only 2% of total, as opposed to what is really 10% of total everywhere else. So I imagine that there's other divisions that are getting hit much harder in terms of actual absolute numbers as well as percentages, where entire teams are disappearing. And that's always pretty dramatic. It's still bad for Xbox, but it sort of tells you, like, they have to adjust too, but like, at least they're probably doing better than everybody else if they're only being asked to let go this many people so far. So maybe they're spreading it out over time, although I don't know them to be this way. Historically, I think they just pulled the band-aid off, but it can be a little bit of a skewed perception. I think that gaming at Xbox actually does quite a lot better than people think. Like, it was like the biggest publisher on the PlayStation ecosystem in April, right? So it's not for lack of success. It's more the narrative is hard to control, especially when you're part of a $1 trillion mothership called Microsoft, and they are having a hard time, and they are trying to compete with Meta and Amazon, etc. Gaming becomes sort of a part victim in that as well. So that's a larger logic in my mind, but it's certainly, it always sends this chill through the industry.
Absolutely.
So I hope everybody's okay. Kick Digital, it's cool people. They're very smart. I'm sure they'll find jobs very soon. What they do well is currently sort of the primary strategy, anyways, for a lot of companies.
Do we
So
know what sector inside of King these cuts pertain to?
no, but it's managers, but that I don't know what that means. I think that they're all focused on AI, I guess. I mean, let's find out. Let me go ask a few people.
All right,
Yeah.
good stuff. I appreciate the meta story that we're looking at here, right? The macroeconomic
Mm-hmm.
is, it's a different kind of narrative than we get than when we're just doing beat to beat of this many layoffs and that many layoffs. Data's okay, I guess. That's what I have.
It never ends. It never stops raining.
Oh, spoken like a true Dutchman.
Mm-hmm.
All right. With that, do you want to get on to talking about the ESA Essential Facts Report?
I would love to.
All
Let's do
right.
this.
Who doesn't want to get into it? So, the Essential Facts Report. Founded in 1994, the Entertainment Software Association has served as the voice and advocate for U.S. video game industry for more than 30 years. Its members are the innovators, creators, publishers, and business leaders that are reimagining entertainment and transforming how we interact, learn, connect, and play. Um, so the ESA is an industry lobby. The ESA members include Amazon, Bandai Namco, Capcom, Disney, Electronic Arts, Epic, Konami, Microsoft, Netflix, Nexon, Nintendo, Riot Games, Roblox, Sony, Square Enix, Take-Two, Tencent America, Ubisoft, Warner Brothers Games, and Wizards of the Coast. Those are all the ones listed in the report, at least. And let's remember how the ESA comes about as a side effect, or kind of as an outcome of the US government telling the game industry, regulate yourselves or we will do it for you in 1993. So the ESA emerges as a response to a series of moral panic hearings in relationship to games, right? And so it wasn't called the Entertainment Software Association at the time, but they also controlled the ESRB, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, right? And so they have for almost 20 years now, I think, put out this document, Essential Facts About the US Video Game Industry. We talked about this pretty extensively 2 years ago, and I think one of the funny effects of that is that the methods section has gotten much longer in the in the ESA Essential Facts report.
What did you say?
If only I could remember. I think I kept saying, "What the fuck was your methodology?" I think that's what I kept saying.
Yes.
And so now we know more about the methodology. Um,
100%.
we were not an active podcast last year when the 2024 report came out. Also, I was so really I felt like such a dummy. We had been looking at an embargoed version of the report that was just a series of the ugliest charts you'd ever seen, and I was like, oh my god, this is the ESA Essential Facts report. I can't put I was just like, this is like, where's all the photos? And then I saw the actual published thing, and I was like, oh, we're back into good style, like, multi-ethnic families playing video games, grandpas
Ethically
and
ambiguous
grandchildren.
people.
Yeah, yeah. Look at this, right? Like, everyone's smiling, having a great time.
But what
I
is
bet
he?
there's a gay couple in here somewhere.
Is that a Belgian? No.
You can always count on the ESA for just a really affirming. I always want to know if they're using stock photography or if they take photos just for this document. It's nice to look at. It's a pretty report.
They go out. They send a photographer out into the world. Go to your neighborhood and go. Where do you live? Okay, yes, we need more pictures. No, it's
And
all
so
stock.
one of the reasons I like looking at these reports is they tell us, what is the game industry worried about? That's often the way that I perceive them. I have an exercise I do in my class where we look at this document together and we're like, what does it say? What does it not say? And what is thinking about those two things side by side, what it does say and what it doesn't say? What does that tell us about what talking points this industry lobby would like to advance this year? And my students are also often stumped. It takes them a while to realize that the person that this is for is journalists. I think most prominently. Maybe in some cases, political reps or other lobbyists, but at first they think it's for like consumers or parents, and I'm like, are your parents reading the ESA Essential Facts report? This is to drive conversations and basically shape conversations in the media about how we talk about games at a national level.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
I think that's a really interesting question. It's like, so I think it's an even more relevant one now because the critique that we've presented to them previously was, where's the stuff? Like, I mean, what's missing? Well, most of it was missing in the past, if you recall. So I do remember us talking. It's like, hey, you know what? This is 2023.
Yes.
It's like this. Why is it so bad? I think that's a good summary of the podcast we did then. It's like, why is this? Aren't you the front line in this 200 billion industry globally? Like, what's going on? And it's just sort of like, here's like, it just felt like they had forgotten to do the work, and then they turned that around. So I do appreciate that. Like, I feel like what they could have done, but is usually the case with organizations like this, is like, if you critique them, they put you on the list and you are now never asked about anything ever again, and nobody's allowed to talk to you, which I've also experienced that in a different setting. But it's so the fact that they actually reached out and they're trying to have a dialogue, I appreciate that. I think that they've changed a lot their position overall. And so what used to be missing was like an actual effort. That was really the takeaway from the earlier ESA report. She like, so this is an organization, and I can look it up real quick, but they basically, so I went through their tax returns for like a 15-year period, and the most recent numbers I have now in front of me are like 2021, so it's a few years old. But it's like
Oh,
they would generate something like $40 million a year. Now, any kind of marketing or like PR report like this, it probably costs like 20, 30 grand for some company to do the survey, and then you have some designer and a bunch of people. So call it $40,000 to do this thing, including all your stock photos, right? It's really like a drop in this bucket of money that you have. It's like, and this is the front line of communicating to the industry and everybody else that doesn't actually know the industry very well, what it's like and what and the importance of gaming and the relevance and the major trends. And they've, to their credit, they've stood taller into the more recent ones. Like they overhauled everything and so on. And it suggests to me at least that they're trying to do this better. And to that extent, I like that. Like it's a
yeah.
sort of they gave it some effort. That still doesn't free them from critical questions, of course. That only means let's ask more critical questions.
That's,
As my,
that's
you
right.
know,
Let's stress you out and drive you nuts. I mean, the thing to always keep in mind is that these are marketing materials, right? And that defines the kinds of questions they're going to ask
hmm
and the
hmm
way that the information is going to be framed, and that no industry lobby is going to produce negative talking points for itself, right? And so there's
of
a
course not.
certain, this is not information that doesn't have a certain kind of positioning. And let's use that language instead of, this isn't duplicitous. This is simply that this is not an uninvested neutral entity trying to understand the full extent of video game use and preferences and play in the United States. This is a document that is created for the purpose of producing
Mhm.
advantageous talking points that people can use when they want to go in and do things like advocate that there should be funds to help video game developers in New York State, right? Really, there is this kind of way in which these materials underwrite or become the evidence for various kinds of local, regional policy initiatives around development in the game business, stuff like that.
Mhm.
Right. That was someone else we heard from at the front of Games for Change, was a guy who, I'm forgetting his name now. I definitely took a photo of it, but from a rep from like the Arts Council of New York,
Mhm.
right? And part of what they do is invest in things like Games for Change and invest in creating New York as an industry hub to strengthen the presence of the game industry in that place as part of a economic goodwill and positive economic growth.
I'm with you on all this. What the ESA does, I think, is communicate outward and inward to the industry, right? And so it's
Hmm.
very much in a position. And again, it's like, they were the ones that were always there explaining to every presidential administration, like, no, video games are not exclusively the cause of violence in the U.S. But
Yes.
whatever. But like somebody has to carry that cross,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
they did.
When Joe Lieberman shows up to a congressional hearing with a plastic gun from an arcade game, there was like we
Joe
had some
Lieberman,
explaining to do.
you
It's an
know.
industry, and that got age ratings, and all of that got rolled out, right, because of this sort of stuff. But
Mhm.
Yost, how are you feeling, top to bottom? Thoughts on the report today?
I feel like they've stepped up the quality. I think that they are doing a much better job laying this out, just to like make things understood, right? And we could talk about sort of what I think are sort of comparable reports, like the state of play that the GDC people do every like month or two before the GDC conference in San Francisco. They put out their state of play report. It looks more on the supply side, so it like that one looks at like people that make the games. This
Yeah,
is really about people that play games, so it's all about the consumers, and it's so diverse, and the age XYZ and gender and this and that. And so it creates a very inclusive picture of who gamers are in the US,
yeah,
which I like. They very clearly state this, and I think it's positions the games industry much more as a mainstream form of entertainment than it is some kind of niche thing with a bunch of the sort of stereotype of some dude living in the basement of his parents' house, covered in Cheeto dust.
Yeah, I
You
mean
know.
that is the stereotype that this report has been working against for what 20 fucking years. It's always a different angle or approach on trying to convince us that, I mean, there's I always love the place where that shows up most clearly is like, you know this 75% of gamers have friends on games or have like met people on games, right? Like there's often this kind of anxiety around proving that gamers are social, that gamers do activities that are not just gaming, right? This year, I remember in the what was it in the 2021 ESA report, they gave information on how many gamers voted, and I thought that was hilarious. Like just as a just to that we are civic minded people engaged in our communities. And this year there's a question. It was kind of perplexing, but they added a question about, for gamers who play an actual sport,
Mm-hmm.
to what extent do you believe playing games helps you in that sport?
Hmm.
Which, I mean, I would like to know the actual percentage of, like, what is not stated is the actual percentage of people who responded positively to saying that I am a gamer and I also play an actual sport, and like what does that mean? And also there's always the issue that like sentiment analysis doesn't necessarily tell you anything. That people thinking a thing does something doesn't mean that it does. And we're just reporting on people's ideas or interpretations of things, not their material realities. But yeah, if people think that, I guess that's cool, right? That tells certainly tell it gives information for companies and marketers about ways that they might think about their products.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it tells us anything real about gamers themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's an it's sort of a big job, and it's constantly changing. I would say, like every couple of years, like the emphasis sort of turns
yeah,
over,
yeah,
right? I mean, we could talk about E3, but let's not waste too much time on that. But it's E3 became irrelevant because it didn't have a mobile focus at all. It was
yeah,
very poor when it comes to
yeah,
digital, and then it sort of feels like a dinosaur, and that's part of what contributes to disappearance. And so the impetus or the accent that they should always be leading that conversation, or at least have like a strong 5 or 10 bullet points to respond to whatever's going on that's outside of their purview or their control. So my mind goes towards Jonathan Haidt, my colleague at Stern. He wrote that book, The Anxious Generation. And full disclosure, I'm working with him on this article around gaming, but it's the understanding that a writer like him has about the games industry is still very underdeveloped,
yeah,
right? It's very much lumped in with gambling and pornography, and basically games are still bad. It's just a different kind of bad this time. And so that's something where an ESA could take some initiative and say, yes, smartphones and social media, they have been the cause of all this anxiety and sort of like detrimental mental health circumstances for especially younger audiences. You know, that's a great topic for the ESA to like prepare or have something to say about in my mind. And so when you ask about what's missing, it's like I think that they've pulled the cart forward to the point where they are have caught up in terms of methodology and research. And now I think it's really about anticipating or reacting to relevant topics like mental health of young audiences. Like what does it say? When I mentioned that Circana published that decline of 25% in spending among younger audiences, what's there to say about Roblox and youth oriented gameplay, and how is that going? Right, there is ample opportunity to sort of lead a conversation in that sense. Like, what should change? What can the U.S. government do to help regulate that space? Maybe before things go south, instead of finding out that there's all these problems in each of these games happening and all these bad agents. And so the ESA can take some initiative in that regard. At the same time, it also seems to me that the ESA has become very much, it creates its own risks as well. Like, so I had a very candid interview with the CEO, the Stanley Pierre Louis, and he's totally friendly. He's nice. He's a lawyer by trade, so he is amicable and personable in that sense. But he's also, he speaks like a lawyer, so he that he thought twice about the next word coming out of his mouth. And in that sense, with a, let's say, a lawyer, not to be too reductive, but to say sort of a legal mind running the show, the ESA also runs the risk of becoming basically just an advocate for IP holders when they could do so much more, which I know is
Yes,
your
yes.
little ponies here, but it's
For yeah, yeah. I
you
mean,
know, it runs the risk.
that's a compelling point. So, like, one of my personal challenges with the ESA is that they were the folks who sent in the lawyers to the U.S. copyright hearings to basically shut down the possibility for games researchers to be able to do remote access video games for purposes of like research, historical scholarship. Like they really came in and just punched the fuck down on us in the
Is that
quote unquote
the legal?
service of their service of their IP holders, right? I mean, it's an interesting point because I think that there is a certain way in which every report exists extracted from its context, right? Like you really have to read between its lines to even guess what decade or year is this document happening.
Mm-hmm.
They very rarely talk about current events in the way that you're talking about popular events. This is not a document for engagement with the current dilemmas around the game industry, not in a straightforward way, right? So the stuff around Roblox, right? If there is a response in the essential facts report, it's about how many parents play games with their kids and how many parents have parental controls, what percentage of parents are in charge of children's spending online, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and and so you see those kinds of, let's say, data points emerge that are clearly tailored to, I think, be in response to those conversations, but there's nothing explicit, right? Like no part of this document is going to say these are straightforward and frank issues that are going on that are carving and shaping the debate around the role of games in children. And what we have is a 30-page document about how games are good for kids. That's that is what this document is here to tell us, right? About the
Mm-hmm.
benefits they bring, both perceived and real, you know. To do the thing that we're kind of maybe poking at here is an entirely different project, right?
Oh, but like I think that's the whole thing about the ESA is that they are running their finances. You generate 40 million a year. You could probably hire enough people, but you have to make these things a priority. And so it's a bit of a question of like they could do more, and then it's a matter of how should they prioritize that extra effort because what we're seeing is only a tip of the iceberg, right? There's so many relevant topics that they uniquely could speak to, but that would that makes the organization bigger, and I'm not sure that that's
I mean,
in its own
the
interest.
organization does not really have a point of view besides games are good.
Right, right. It's the I mean, and so we should invite some of them to come to NYU. Let's do a talk. Let's because
We're just gonna pitch that on the podcast right now.
well, why not? Like, I'm sure they listen. Like, and it's the thing is like I've had Patricia Vance speak in my class a few years ago. She's great. Sort of this no nonsense New York lady, and she runs the ESRB. Like, and she figured out how to do that. And she's one of the most senior people in the organization. And Aubrey Quinn, who does the PR marketing. These are people that I know, at least from my experience with them, personally, and it's in between the sort of the offstage talks that you have with these people. It's like they just want to do a good job, right? So I don't think it's a lack of will that there's a lack of interest there, but these agendas get shaped because no one has the conversation. So maybe inviting them would be an interesting thing. I'm sure you had to have something to say about it. Maybe we could do that, but it's I think it's just like I'm so impressed by us for you know having criticism on some of these things, and then people coming back to us like, actually, like, yeah, we have been thinking about doing a better job. Help us do a better job, and then they do. And
Yeah,
so, if we attribute them the responsibility, then we should carry some of it ourselves too. I think.
yeah. I will give one of the things that this does highlight is initiative that I will give some real credit where credit is due here to the ESA on. There's a new accessibility initiative that they have that crops up maybe close to the N. Do you remember what I'm talking?
Accessibility.
Yeah, this shows up around pages like 31, 33.
Yeah, I see it.
And they have the Accessible Games Initiative.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
so one of the things that an organization like the ESA is able to do, because it has all the stakeholders at the table, is that they've tried to kind of standardize the way accessibility labeling happens
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
across all of these different companies, so that they can be like tagged appropriately for things like, can everything from like controls, like can you do stick inversion, to can you play this just with a mouse or just with a keyboard, can you play this just with touch, to can you change the kind of contrast of colors for various kind of visual disabilities, can you control the size of captions, things that just make, can you save at any time, are there difficulty levels, right, that you can change, right? A broad spectrum of imagining what kind of accessibility refers to.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think those kinds of initiatives are, you know, net good, and they are a unique byproduct of an organization like the ESA that sits at the center of a bunch of these companies,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, they can shine their light on this stuff, and
And they're able to really push for standardization in a way that can be used, I would hope or think, by these kind of publishers and developers themselves.
mm-hmm.
Uh,
I didn't know that 21% of adult players reports having a disability. That's 1 in 5. That's a lot of people.
yeah, yeah.
So the
Um,
more you know, but like, don't get all like soft on them now. Like, look, if we're going to invite them for a conversation, like, we got to make sure that you stay angry. Otherwise, we got no dialogue.
oh, I see what's going on here. I mean, other things I thought were interesting. Virtual reality, still nobody cares about. Like, and the stats seem to prove that virtual reality by generate, even Gen Alpha, doesn't really seem 14%, 13 for Gen Z, 13 for millennials. It's still a pretty niche, years after it was supposed to blow up for what, the third, fourth, fifth time. 31% of players basically play only on mobile. I thought that was interesting. One of the other questions I had for you, and maybe you can help me understand this as a data guy, Yost, because the ESA, as far as I can remember, these documents never really do year over year analysis, right? They don't, or like every once in a while, they're like, 20 years ago, 19% of these people said they play games, and now
Yeah.
it's 45. But I went back and looked and made a little chart of
Ooh.
all of the what each year claims is how many millions of players there are.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some years where that number swings very wildly. And so
Hmm.
I went back to 2019.
Okay.
In 2019, they only had data on adults. Everything after that, there was like 18 and over, and then full gamers, which I think is like kind of 8 and up, maybe, is what they. And gamer being defined as a person who plays a game for 1 hour a week,
Mm-hmm.
right? According to the last like 6-7 years of this, the high watermark for millions of gamers in America was 2021, when there were 226 million players. Then in 2022, that goes down 10 million. In 2023, that goes down 3 million. In 2024, that goes down to 190. And I was like, really? We lost 30 million players between
Mm-hmm.
these years? Like, and now it's up to 205. So between last year and this year, the reports have a 15 million person difference in the number of players. And I'm just trying to understand, like, how, like, that seems like pretty big swings, and
I
how that happens, and like, is that normal in this kind of, or is there some kind of stabilization that needs to happen in terms of the way that this data is being, like, it seems like every year some of these years they're bringing up really different numbers that
Yes.
don't seem explainable by more young people becoming gamers or more people dying, right? I'm trying to understand, like.
Yes. 12 million gamers didn't make it,
That's
so
right.
the
12 million
population
gamers
is
died
down
between.
7%. Microsoft announces more layoffs. No, it ends up. This is I would put the responsibility here not with the ESA but with the vendor that they use, which historically has been NPD and Circana. The ESA doesn't do any of its research itself.
Yes.
I
Oh,
mean,
no,
they
no,
do
I
have a
know.
research team, but it's more along the lines of somebody managing the different vendor
The
contracts and accounts.
past 2 years, it's been YouGov, which I think
Yes.
has a partnership with Circana. Before that, it was Circana, then it was MPD, but everything before 2022 was Ipsos.
Yep. It's so switching vendors gets you different methodologies. The thing is, like, rather, I mean, they're not going to conduct their own primary research, so they always
No.
rely on someone else, and so that's probably why you're seeing these jumps. I think it should be an honorary role for a large multi-million-dollar vendor to provide this kind of information for the U.S. industry, particularly if you're based here. So I don't think that's really a for-profit thing. Give that same analyst and research company a seat at their charity events, like, whatever. Thank you. You spent 30 grand worth of research with us for free. So I think it really should be provided to them for free. And in the absence, you get these competing contracts because budgets matter, and then you get these methodologies. And so it's a bit of a whatever, sort of problematic just by default. But I wouldn't put that with the ESA at all. I think what you can put with the ESA perhaps is like there should be a more substantial research budget always. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
you carry so much water, like you got to have better shoes than this. Or whatever the metaphor is here. And so because consistency of methodology is also a function of money. Like you can hire more researchers, you
Yeah.
can do two competing studies every year and average it out,
I
whatever.
mean, really, and so it's consistent that the data set is always, the past 2 years it's been 5,000. 1,000 of those interviewees seem to not play games, and 4,000 of them do.
Mhm.
Uh, and
Yes.
that from that number we are extrapolating to millions and millions of people in the general population, as well as their sentiments and preferences. And yeah, I mean, I think what would a scientific, what would an actually scientific version of this report require in terms of
Yeah, but
data?
this is for media. This is for
Yeah,
like
I know, but humor
Joe
me.
Schmo reporter.
Humor me. Like, we wanted to know better how many people play games, and, like, not just their demographics, but motivations, preferred genres, generational breakdowns. What would that actually require? If that was going to be like a social science research paper.
Yeah, excellent question. I think it should be, rooted in academic research or something at the level of, like, Department of Labor.
Hmm.
So, basically like a not a for-profit executor.
Because this is also the kind of work that could be done by a third party academic research team rather than a paid data company.
I mean, look, here's one of my dreams. So, like, let's say that NYU and USC and a bunch of other cool universities get together and they all fund like a gaming group and they provide a very clear agenda. And some of it includes research that we just publicly spread around. Why don't we have that? Like, and it's just a matter of time and initiative. It's
Hmm.
just somebody not rallying the troops. And so, like, with an ESA or with the buying of the industry at large, you could say, we're all on the same page. We just want to help people understand this better because it does matter. It's not just an economic impact, but it's also sort of the social, cultural, the mental health aspects of it all. I do think a lot of food groups are underrepresented. The fact that so many companies didn't realize that women play games up until like recently, like, it's just that's the outcome of just people with spreadsheets at publishers trying to risk mitigate all day long. So in that sense, there's a much broader conversation to be had here. Games for Change, you should have a stake in this too. Let's bring all these different organizations together. But until that happens, you're going to have these piecemeal efforts, and they're going to be contradictory or half-assed because it's all about margin at some point, right? YouGov, I'm sure they do a great job, but at the end of the day, they look at the number of dollars that they spent and what they get out of it, and there has to be some percentage between those things that's reasonable. So then the thing that it's trying to do is beholden to the economics of doing it actually. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas, you could imagine a version of this that, I mean, I don't know, 30 grand to do an online survey. Like, I feel like you could, there is a social science research team out there at a university that could take that grant, could do a lot with that grant money
We could do
in,
more, definitely.
in terms of volume of participation, where they're hitting people, range of questions,
Hmm.
and with a different orientation, I think, to the kind of, maybe objectivity isn't the right word I want to use, but to get a lot of these questions are phrased in a way that makes a positive answer inevitable.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I understand the function, and yet, whenever I see that, it annoys the piss out of me because you've basically cooked the answer before you made the cake. I don't know if that metaphor holds up, but you know what I mean. Like you've already determined the result you want,
Hmm.
and so you've gotten a totally not surprising answer. Like, oh my god, I'm shocked that families play games. Like, like what is the, and that's, I get that that's a data point that can be circulated in a fucking press release posted on gamedeveloper.com every year, but like could we, what would it be like to ask ourselves questions that maybe we don't know the answer to, you know and let ourselves be surprised, and then would that actually give you better information about where your interventions are most needed?
Yeah, 100%. A lot of this kind of research is done not to learn something new, but to basically justify the decision that was already made at some point. And so it begets itself. And there's a lot of tension. Like I said earlier, like large companies, they don't want to do all this new wacky stuff. Like they just want to steady the boat the whole time.
Yeah, this is a thing we publish every year.
Hmm.
We want to make sure it looks, it's a good business card for what we do. um,
Yeah,
but yeah, I've always been curious about what an actual scientific approach to this set of questions would look like.
like a rigorous,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, a
100%. Like,
methodologically and
what if we
institutionally
took it just as
rigorous.
serious as we do the automobile industry and the number of deaths and who drives and who goes too fast and what are the insurance costs and the economic impact, all this kind of stuff. The final thing I'll say about this report is that, like, I wonder what the shelf life is just culturally on these like stock photos. Like, are we going to see the end of that, or is this going to be the rest of my life of these? Like, have you ever been in like a family situation, like
Not,
sitting like this?
not ever.
It seems to be
Or
it's all
maybe
switches and PlayStation controllers. Do I see any
that's,
Xbox?
is anyone playing on their phone? Oh, this person's playing a PlayStation on their computer.
Oh no,
Um,
wait. Oh no, that's an Xbox controller. Okay,
I
yeah.
have. Oh, this lady's playing on a computer. She's also holding her mic.
And there's the iPad here. Okay,
Um,
okay, okay.
I have played with kids but it never,
Oh no, that's quite a few Xbox controllers. Okay.
sure doesn't look that good.
And then, like it's just like these pictures, and it's just like companies haunt you with these. Where are these people? Like, and who
Yeah.
keeps taking pictures of them? And it's like
Where,
they're always so deliriously playing games. There's like this
I
is
know, when
no.
usually whereas actually when you see a person play games, they are usually so locked in. They
Uh huh.
look like they're like in a K-hole, they're like,
Oh,
like,
and
I
then
just I
these
just I
people.
just killed our producer. Like the like level of intensity is like, that's what actual people playing games looks like.
It's
Uh,
it's not at all the experience I know it to be. It's also like there's, and clearly this is very suburban because it's like, who are all these people sitting with their shoes on in the house? What the it's gross. All right, I'll stop.
you know,
But gross.
you know,
Let's do it.
I remember, I still yearn for the days when the ESA report would have all those quotes from like Frank Lance and Katie Salen and Catherine, like about how games, like how culturally important games are. I liked that kind of hot minute where they were kind of borrowing from a fringe of game academia to kind of put forward their mission in the world. And by like, I mean I was amused by. I thought it was,
It pleased you.
you're reading. I appreciate that. You know, yeah.
That's fantastic.
All right. Are we good? Do we want to?
I
All of a
think we've
sudden.
exhausted it for this year. We'll be back on the ESA next year.
Well, yeah, be sure to forward whatever email you get about this to me.
I will do.
And so I have a poem this week. If you have an own, I know I often put the responsibility of negativity on you, but this time I'm ready.
Go,
If that's
go,
needed.
do it. Let's do it. Let's hear it.
So there was a. Did you see the EA CEO payment graph that went around?
I saw something come by. What's the problem?
So
What did you?
so um, so this was a graph that Steven Titilio made on his Substack over at GameFile. This was posted last week, but EA CEO's pay is up as EA worker median income drops,
Mm-hmm.
and he creates a graph to show you the difference in the scale, and you have to keep scrolling. Like that's how much, like the CEO, how much he's actually paid in 2021 was
Mm-hmm.
44 million
Mm-hmm.
versus you keep I guess in 2025 it was reported compensation was 31 million, so it's gone down, but it's still you have to, and then like the worker it's like 117K. And so there was this, somebody turned it into a gif of
Mm-hmm.
like the top of the chart, and it just keeps panning and panning and panning and panning until you it takes several seconds to get from the scale difference between the CEO and I think what was the median worker compensation. And
Or
it was a pretty hilarious, I mean, like hilarious in the grim way, right? It created there was a quite a good stir on Blue Sky about it.
or Steven Titilio is terrible at making graphs.
No, he might be great at making graphs. I think the graph itself is an argument.
No, I agree with you. Like, look, it's true. Like that's true for EA, and it's probably the same for every other large publisher in gaming, as well as any other Fortune 500 company. That the difference between compensation and consideration for senior management compared to average managers and workers is wildly out of proportion. Hundreds of X difference. And so, yeah, you can chart that out. That's absolutely true. And you must also remember that a lot of times these CEOs hold these jobs for like a decade. So they get this every year. And what they've already been paid has been accumulating wealth elsewhere at some percentage year over year. And so, you can find all this information, by the way. It's not secret because it has to be reported to the SEC. But if you were to add it all up, like someone like Andrew Wilson is worth hundreds of millions because of this. So his chart, even for this 1 year, is out of control. Like that's just 1 year out of 15 years. So it's an incredible thing. I guess the implication is that it's unfair.
I think what happened was that worker compensation actually went down while the CEO's compensation went up 5 million. And so
Yes.
the workers are getting paid less even as inflation rises and the CEO is making more. And that was, I think, the I mean, obviously we understand that, like, we live in a world where the disparity between worker and executive compensation is maybe the biggest, is one of the, like, the level of income inequity is a gross malfeasance culturally, right? And but this was that it was down from 149,000 to 117,000, while the CEO is making 5 million more. And it's like, if you like why are you all baffled that Zora Mamdani got this is exactly the argument, is that companies are their investment strategies for executives rather than entities
Hmm.
that make products.
Yeah,
Like
I agree with that.
that's the
In the end, like it's like a lot of times these large companies, they become basically like private equity funds that also make games,
yeah.
right? They just have like billions of dollars that they manage, and the compensation is based on that. on the progression of that. Like we talked about GameStop, that's all what GameStop does anymore. It's like, yeah, sure, they're kind of a retailer, but it's mostly private equity that sells collectibles in a sort of Radio Shack level storefront now. So it's in many ways publishers are so capital intensive that a large part of their revenue comes from just managing that part. And people like Andrew Wilson and Strauss Zelnick, it's like they are purebred capitalists. Like that's the name of the game. That's how they get paid. Like that's how the numbers go. We all the time because it's just like that's the nature of capital, especially at that level. It's like your salary doesn't double year over year, but your income based on capital can, right? If you had bought Nvidia stock, if you like, I know plenty of people. This is one of the exceptions, and I'm so happy for this. Right? It's like I used to work with Nvidia like a decade ago, and it was just middle management, and it was just some guy who did marketing, and there was this lady who did like whatever comms in North America, and then you just talk, but they were all like early hires, and they all got a bunch of like stock compensation. And if you check on LinkedIn now, they're all like, hey, you know what? I've taken some time off just to really reflect on things because they all made 10 million bucks and good for them, but it's very rare that employees get
Yeah.
any kind of
Yeah.
like significant money event because it's just not set up that way. I mean, I think we share a perspective of this, but my entry point into this is always going to be Thomas Piketty. It's like, look, here is 300 years of human civilization. Let's look at how labor versus capital progresses. And oh, check this out. Capital always
It
outperforms
sucks.
capital. Always outperforms. Yeah, labor is just not set up that way. So it's for those reasons, this is always going to be the case, which is not okay. And that's not why we should accept it. But that tends to be, particularly at the high end,
We'll
the nature of it.
we'll put a link in the chat to the Blue Sky post. It takes 12 seconds to scroll the entire chart. That's how long the graph is. It's
So
quite.
Steven can't make charts and you can't scroll. That's like, it's just.
All right,
That's
fine. What's your own for the week?
I'll be modest. And speaking of CEOs, I'm excited. So I just got confirmation that for next semester in the fall, my sort of I've started this current CEO talk. So I've had the C-suite from Xbox 2 semesters ago. I had last semester CEO from Hasbro. Next semester, I'm gonna have the CEO for Unity come in, Matthew Bromberg, which is interesting because these people are not supposed to be out and about,
Yeah.
but here they are. And it gives me an opportunity to ask him some questions in the context of the universities and like, okay, let's talk about some of these strategic issues. But I'm always impressed and surprised that they say yes. And it's very exciting to see it. So my excitement this week is built around that. Oh, thank you. And here comes my laptop delivery. It ends up being it's always hard to get these people, but he confirmed, so I'm excited. And I will invite, I guess, everybody to tell me what questions to ask. So let's open the
Okay.
channels. What should I
Okay.
ask the CEO for Unity during the fireside scheduled in the fall?
The fireside. We're gonna have to talk some other time about why all this shit is called a fireside.
There's never
When
any
there is
fire.
no fire. So,
Should-
all right, Yost, we are off next week, right?
Correct.
Yeah, we're taking a little extended holiday that starts this holiday weekend. So no podcast next week, but we will follow up with y'all after that. And until that time, good night and good game.